So later on in the show, Will Albright, who is he just signed from Greenville to play with the Tennessee Volunteers in 2 years, actually, an early signing. He's a long snapper, ranked as one of the top 5 in the country in high school football. Who's ranking long snappers, really? I mean, anyway, but he will be snapping for the Tennessee Volunteers. And as I said, when we announced it on this show, the news broke a couple of days ago. And I said, that means you'll be able to tell on special teams plays who the people are from Greenville in Neyland Stadium. They're going to be the ones with the binoculars on saying, see that? The guy in the center snapping a ball. He's a Green Devil. He's from Greenville. Hopefully it works out better for him than it did Dustin Moore. It's not working out very well right now for Saudi Arabia, or at least their hockey, listen to me. Wrong sport that scores goals. Their soccer team, they were trailing in the 71st minute of a 90-minute game, Russia 2-0. Big World Cup news was that Spain fired their coach on the eve of the World Cup. He was going to coach Real Madrid, and the Spanish national team said, no. And even essentially what they said, this was Spain, the federation cannot be left out of a negotiation by one of its workers. The socialist term is now alive and well in Spain. Or is that just the AP's translation of it? I mean, because obviously they were going to be writing this in Spanish. The Federation cannot be left out of a negotiation by one of its employees and be informed 5 minutes before the press release. So Spain might be in turmoil. Like I said, they play tomorrow against Portugal. There's a rivalry, 2 p.m., as the World Cup has begun. Russia, they just scored another goal. So the home country is happy in the World Cup. It's 3-0 there. One other note that I saw, Ann Donovan passed away. Ann Donovan was the Basketball Hall of Famer, won a national championship at Old Dominion, and a couple of gold medals in the 1980s. Was actually part of the inaugural Women's Hall of Fame class, and she coached in both college and the WNBA, 6'8". First female coach and youngest person to win a title in the WNBA, and also won a title with the Seattle Storm in 2004. She was, after that, something of a journeyman coach in the WNBA. But Ann Donovan, remember those great Old Dominion teams, what with Nancy Lieberman and such, passing away, and she was only 58 years old. One of the things, though, and I hesitate to say this, but it does kind of show, we've lost now Pat Summitt. In fact, this would have been her birthday. Now Ann Donovan. And these are some of the giants of women's basketball. But also, it kind of says to me that the sport now, it's been around a while. I mean, 1978, it's only been 40 years that the women's basketball has been part of the NCAA. It wasn't, before then, it was only a few years before that the players were wearing tunics and 3 players to a side. And even a women's basketball championship in college wasn't even sanctioned till it was by the AWIW in 1969. Think about that. So, where I'm going with this sad news, obviously, but we're now having full lives. In other words, women's basketball has come to a point now where its participants have had now full lives. Now, one interesting thing I did see is that Donovan, and they spoke of her, being a coach in WNBA. This is one of the things that I remind people about Holly Warlick, and I don't know. They said they were talking about an extension, but I haven't heard anything. Have you? And, of course, the long knives seem to be out for Holly Warlick. 1 year left on her contract. Hey, Lady Vols were knocked off in the round of 32 in the NCAA tournament last year. You're no Pat Summitt, Holly. That seems to be a consensus. I think it's very short-sighted. Not only is Holly bringing in real good recruiting classes to Tennessee, but she's doing everything in her era that Pat Summitt did during Pat Summitt's final 4 years as a coach. Also, let's face facts. Remember that 98 Tennessee Volunteers team, the one that when they went undefeated and defeated Old Dominion in the NCAA final, they were the greatest basketball team, women's basketball team of all time. Remember that? Well, they aren't anymore because Connecticut surpassed them on numerous occasions with the teams that Gino Auriemma has put out in the 20 years since. However, it's a different game back then. And I know this is the first time Tennessee has lost in the regionals since they started hosting them in Knoxville. The only time they've ever done it. Yeah, but it's a little bit different when Pat Summitt was playing Tennessee Tech in those games. And last year, Tennessee was playing a number 12 team in a country. Not exactly the cupcakes of the past that Summitt had. Women's basketball, yeah, and it shows where we're having full lives lived in the sport now with Summitt and now Donovan. But it's come so far. Old Dominion, which was Donovan's team, of course. I mean, it really isn't any more in the cards any longer for that women's basketball team to contend for a championship than it is, say, Louisiana Tech, which also dominated women's basketball in the early NCAA days. It's kind of like asking a Conference USA team to win the national championship in football. I mean, it's just gotten to the point now where the major conferences have taken over women's basketball just as they have football. Call it progress. That's what the fans of the major programs will say. But yeah, there's a lot more competition for the Tennessee Lady Vols on the hardwood than ever before. It isn't just Tennessee and Connecticut anymore. And really, the decline of Tennessee to be the third best women's basketball program in the SEC, well, that started under Pat Summitt. Remember that before you cast the long knives out for Holly Warlick. I've said I'd give her an extension even if you're thinking of firing her. When you look at Holly Warlick's career and her longevity at Tennessee, yeah, even if you fired her after the extension, she's worth that severance package. She's earned it. And we'll have to wait and see if she's going to be canned after the next season. I somewhat think that with the recruiting class that she's brought in, that Tennessee might be quite competitive on the hardwood in women's basketball next year. Excuse me, to the Facebook viewers out there. I'm Marky Billson, Tri-City Sports Now. Going to be joined by Will Albright here in the near future. We're having people coming into the studio as we speak here. By the way, I want to remind everybody, yesterday I had a trivia question, and nobody was able to get it, and it was referencing Joe Schlabotnik. Who was Joe Schlabotnik? Well, you have to like reading the comics to know who Joe Schlabotnik was. That was Charlie Brown's favorite baseball player. You remember that was a running gag that Joe Schlabotnik was his favorite baseball player, kind of a scrub, you know, and all this sort of stuff. It was the only card he couldn't get. When you were collecting cards, you used to get all the Joe Schlabotniks. It was tough to get the MVP, it seemed. I don't know. They may have made just as many cards of, say, the future Hall of Famers as they did the utility infielders. It just didn't seem that way. Anyhow, But no, there's a very funny bit right there where Charlie Brown, I remember, wants to trade Lucy, has somehow gotten Joe Schlabotnik's baseball card. And he wants to trade a host of Hall of Famers, 20 of them, just to get Joe Schlabotnik. Because that's his favorite player, and that's who he needs, evidently, to complete his set. So anyway, that is the story. That was the answer to the trivia question. I'm going to ask another one here, because the Appalachian League season is just about to be underway. But there's a story coming out and out of Baltimore, and I'm going to tie it into a giveaway here. Chris Davis, who is in the third year of a multi-million-dollar contract, 6-year contract with the Baltimore Orioles. And the Baltimore Orioles this year have been the worst team in all of baseball. Let me look at their won-loss record real fast here. It is a whopping 1948. 19-48. 19 up and 48 down. They've lost at least 3 in a row. 1948 is the last year the Cleveland Indians won the World Series. Maybe that's an omen for the Tribe. I don't know. But the Orioles are 19 up, 48 down, and part of the reason is Chris Davis is hitting 150. There's a bar in Baltimore, reminiscent of my hero growing up, Willie Stargell, giving away shots whenever Chris Davis gets a hit. Remember, he's hitting 150. Willie Stargell he owned a chain of chicken restaurants, and whenever he had a home run while somebody was placing an order, they'd get it for free. Then Willie Stargell hit 125 home runs in about 3 seasons, and his chicken restaurants went out of business. Nevertheless, that is true, by the way. There is the Bartender's Pub in Baltimore is offering free shots whenever Chris Davis gets a hit. He hasn't gotten many because he's hitting 150. But that reminded me, and I can tie this into something local. And I've got the Greenville Reds t-shirt for somebody who might know this. But there was a former Tennessee football great who actually owned a bar on Harford Road in Baltimore. That's the main drag in Baltimore, Harford Road. Who was he? I'll give you this hint. The bar was called The Top Kick. And oh yeah, it's a Tennessee legend from yesterday. But if you know the Tennessee legend who owned a bar, yes, in Baltimore, it's called The Top Kick, okay? Harford Road. If you know the answer to that, give me a call at 423-743-6124, and I'll give you a Greenville Reds t-shirt. Now, admittedly, you got to come into Irwin and pick it up here in our studios, but nevertheless, the legendary Tennessee Volunteer who owned a bar in Baltimore, Harford Road. It was called The Top Kick. If you know who it was, I'll give you that t-shirt. I'll hold it up on Facebook here very shortly to show our viewers on Facebook. Phone number to call again, 423-743-6124. Appalachian League season begins very shortly. So, yeah, why not start with the giveaways and all of that? And, of course, we'll be talking to somebody else with a Greenville, Tennessee tie and a Tennessee Volunteer tie, Will Albright, in the next hour. He's signed to be their long snapper of the future. He's currently playing on what might be the best football program. Well, it is in Northeast Tennessee, but it might be the best athletic program in the state. Tri-City Sports Now, I'm Marky Billson. Yeah, the battery for hire on Get Tire Fire. I'm ready and aimed at you coming back after this.